everyone. I wish I could see you in person. I'm imagining that you're incredibly excited about having called Reverend Hillary to be your new minister, and I'm hoping that you're still basking in that energy and glow. I'm going to read a sermon or talk to you about something called soul food, and not the kind of soul food that you can buy in a restaurant, but the kind of soul food that feeds your soul. So I've been reading Thomas More's book called Meditations on the Monk Who Dwells in Everyday Life. Moore, whose name you may recognize from his very popular books Care of the Soul and Soul Mates, lived in a monastery from the age of 13 till he was about 26. His experiences there created a framework that still informs his life. The premise of his book is that we too may benefit from seeking the monk in our daily lives. To begin, I ask you to reflect for a moment on the word soul. What image or feeling does this word bring up for you? For some, especially those with a strong traditional Christian background, soul means that part of us which survives after death. For many traditional Christians, the soul is tainted and has to be purified or transformed in a process called sanctification before it can be saved from death or hell. For others, salvation is predetermined. We are either damned or saved from birth. The state of the soul is for most a question of its salvation in the afterlife. So taking care of our soul becomes a kind of moral vigilance to ensure that we earn our place in heaven. Our Unitarian and Universalist traditions both differ greatly from this view. Universalists believe that all souls will be reconciled with God ultimately, and Unitarians believe that there's nothing tainted in our souls, that in our essence, not necessarily in our actions, we are saved as we are. As Thomas Starr King said, Universalists think that God is too good to damn them forever, and Unitarians think that they are too good to be damned. Be that as it may, the central feature of religious views of the soul is that which is eternal, about or within us. In reading Thomas More's book, there is a more comprehensive description of soul and how we experience in our daily lives without regard for an afterlife. The words that come to mind: longing, satisfaction, prayer, silence, destiny, attraction, union, meaning are a bit elusive, but touch upon the inward nature of soul. I tend to think of soul, my soul, not as a separate entity within me, but as a deeper sense of myself. It's a quality of being that is purely me without regard for opinions or desires of others. It is the voice that knows what I need to grow spiritually. It is the voice that tells me when I have given myself away or wounded myself. My soul is the guide to deeper self-knowledge and knowledge of others. Soul sees beyond the physical, the practical, and the obvious into the souls of others. Here we are in a pandemic lockdown, and we have a wonderful opportunity to go deeper into ourselves as a result. We can spend time without any necessary productivity and find out who we really are. I participated in a meditation many years ago that was life-changing. A group of about 35 of us were in a workshop together for 5 days. It was one of those ones very popular in the 80s that used emotional music and various intense processes to rapidly create the sense of possibility and change. Often they were disappointing in that when the experience wore off later on, people found themselves in the same old habits of thinking and being. This particular meditation stayed with me and changed my view of other people ever since. The last day, we were asked to stand in 2 rows such that we were standing facing one other person. For 5 minutes, we looked in the eyes of the other person and then moved on to the next one. Very simple, and yet not. At first, we saw each other through our outer personalities. The woman with too much makeup, the rebel, the person who talked too much, the young man who thought he was so handsome. What happened, though, was that during those 5 minutes, which is really a long time to be staring into someone's eyes, our awareness of these superficial aspects of the other person began to fall away, and their eyes truly became a window into their soul. I particularly remember looking into the eyes of a man who had confessed during the week that he was an alcoholic. At first I saw the toll drinking had taken on him, on his body, and his shame was also apparent in his eyes. As we looked deeper, I saw a marked change in his eyes, and where there had been a kind of dull avoidance, there appeared a directness and honesty, even wisdom, and certainly recognition. It became clear to me that he was not his alcoholism. I don't think I could ever be anything but a UU after that experience. The souls of each, no matter their circumstances or what they had done in their life, were nothing less than beautiful. To see this opening within each and everyone, and to see in their eyes the recognition of me, no matter how different we were in life, was breathtaking. It also made me more aware of how covered over we become by what we focus upon and consider important in life. So how do we feed our soul? In other words, how do we stay in touch with ourselves in the midst of so much that would pull us away? Thomas More suggests that the life of a monk offers some real lessons for this in the art of soulful living. When I was in my 20s, I worked in a high-powered aerospace company. I enjoyed my job, but once in a great while, it would feel so much like a rat race to me that I would call in sick when I wasn't. On those days, I would take myself to the art museum and go to the modern art exhibit there. I would stand in front of each of the paintings or sculptures and ask myself, how does this feel to me? I'd wonder about the artist's intentions and realize that I couldn't know them. I could only know how I was affected by the work. It wasn't just an escape, but a chance to reconnect with something in myself that wasn't about productivity. For the monk, everything in life is a spiritual discipline. Indeed, if your aim is soul awareness, then anything can be food for the soul. Moore's observation about money, that what matters is how much of ourselves we give to it, can be applied to many pursuits in life. We may wash dishes, clean floors, write papers, or type addresses, and in the process, focus upon our inner life. It is harder, I think, to maintain a sense of ourselves in circumstances where our activities are wounding to the soul. Moore distinguishes spirit from soul. He says when spirit visits us, it moves us towards action, commitment, ambition, goals, ideals, vision, and altruism. All of these feed the soul, but they also wound it. To the soul, their opposites are equally important. Waiting, doubting, retreating, and not going anywhere. Not knowing, not seeing, and being absorbed in oneself. We really do have an opportunity here for all of that in our quarantine state. Let's not be too hasty, though, about placing these tendencies outside of ourselves alone. How many of us have ever come home too tired from working to want to listen to our kids? How many of us work obsessively? How many of us are intolerant when we hear views and values that conflict with our own? Can we sit with another's viewpoint until we really understand it? A woman told me the story of a well-meaning church group that went to Guatemala to build housing for the poor. When they arrived there, they found that the people didn't want new housing as much as they wanted these Americans to sit and listen while they told them the stories of their lives. Practicing seeing beyond our conceptions into another's life is a way of feeding our own soul and building soulful community. The monk calls this obedience, by which he means listening to the voice of God. One way that UUs really express the values of the monk, although it is joked about often and may not be common in actual monastery, is our tendency to want to talk about everything. The old joke that UUs, given the choice, would go to a discussion group about heaven rather than actually go to heaven, in my experience, is quite true. But I think this is one way we experience the kind of doing nothing that feeds our souls. That we are willing to sit in dialogue with differing views and remain respectful and loving to one another is contrary to what ambition and productivity would ask of us. The more we break down our jealously guarded possession of truth, this part of creating intimacy with self, this is part of creating intimacy with self, others, and the world. Feeding our souls is quite a bit about bringing the sacred and the beautiful into our lives. I notice children doing this quite frequently. A practical task often becomes for a child an opportunity to create art. Being asked by an adult to do almost anything, a child will find some artistic flair to add to it. A dance to do along the way, a thoughtful or aesthetic arrangement of food or toys. They'll stop to smell or taste what they're working with. They give voices to inanimate objects, and they make up stories to go with the task. And they don't care too much about completion. Children don't understand adults' obsession about getting things right. It seems sad to them and almost bereft of life. The animation that children bring to life is a kind of sacrament. We could learn a lot from them. We can't become children again, but we can allow ourselves to walk barefoot in the grass sometimes, or play. We can take a moment out of our day and look at something beautiful, or as one person said they do, turn the radio off for a while we're driving. I wonder how many of you found the silent service that we had a few months ago refreshing. Some of you spoke to me about it afterwards. That's a pure experience of ourselves and our connection. Moore encourages us to draw upon religious tradition not as a basis of authority, but as a rich source of soulful imagination. At another UU church, I knew a woman named Carol, who had been in a religious order for many years as a young woman. She told us the story of an elderly nun named Sister St. John that the young nuns loved and turned to frequently for advice. Sister St. John believed that most problems, more or less, could be solved with holy water. Carol remembers a couple of times when this was astonishingly effective. The building they lived in was very old and had bats living in the attic. One of the bats found its way downstairs, much to the horror of the young women. Sister St. John told them not to worry, and she managed to get close enough to sprinkle the bat with holy water. The next morning, they found it lying dead in the holy water font. In the same old building, there was a closet whose door just refused to budge, no matter what they did to try and open it. Sister St. John said, "Never mind," and sprinkled holy water on the lock. She then proceeded to turn the handle, and the door opened. Is Sister St. John's faith in holy water a metaphor for what engaging our soul in our everyday life accomplishes? Do dangers subside and doors open? Do we turn from being possessed by demons and objects of desire to animating and mastering them? It may seem entirely impractical to regard work as prayer, reading as contemplation, following orders as listening to the Word of God, community as a foretaste of heaven, time determined at least 50% as ritual, celibacy as a positive prerequisite to service, and imagining the ordinary details of life through a filter of sacredness. But each of these things has a place in the life of our soul. When we bring the infinite and eternal to our thoughts, we engage in prayer. Likewise, when we want the best for those we love. When we read to enrich our minds rather than for some project, we are in contemplation. When we think of ourselves as part of a community with every person we encounter, we help create a heavenly world. When we give ourselves structures that allow us the freedom to create, we are benefiting from ritual. When we hold our sexuality sacred, we can have the essence of celibacy, even when sexual relations are part of our life. And opportunities abound to view the details of our life through the lenses of meaning and beauty. May it be so for all of us.